So I'm a bit different than most people in that one of my favorite generations of gaming was the 16-bit era. So the Super Nintendo was my favorite system of all time, mostly just because that's what I owned during my formative years. So one of the great things about working in Reason is that we have sample synthesis we can work with, which is going to sound a little bit closer to what you'd get coming out of a Super Nintendo. And that's where I tend to push my music. That's kind of the sound I go for. A fusion of the earlier Nintendo sound and the later Super Nintendo sound, along with Sega Genesis, all the systems I owned as a kid. So we're using the NN19 sampler here. The NNXT tends to sound a bit more realistic, so I like working with this one instead. I've loaded in an accordion sound, but I don't really want an accordion tone, so I've done a couple of things. One is I've pulled my sample start back. And what that does is remove the breathy sound from the beginning of the accordion sample and have it pop straight into the sustain when you press the key down. And we've also used the same Scream digital distortion that we did before. So when we do that, instead of getting an accordion, we get an organ. Which is going to be similar to, the Final Fantasy series, like Kefka's theme, that kind of thing, or Zombies Ate My Neighbors, Curse of Dr. Tongue type music. So if you want more of a Castlevania type feel to the chiptunes you're working on, or the music you're doing, this is a good way to go. Let's take that same principle and apply it to something everybody's familiar with. Here we're working with strings, and you're probably going to immediately be familiar. So we got the Zelda's Dark Dungeon music. You're already envisioning these horrible little hands dropping from the ceiling, trying to drag you back to the beginning. In order to create that pulsing tone, simply enough, just pushing the velocity up on the downbeats, so that only every fourth of the 16 notes has the emphasis on it. And then we've loaded a big strings thin sample into our NN19 sampler. Again, push the sample start back. And then instead of using Scream distortion here, we're running it through a vocoder. But we are also not using the vocoder function at all. There's a little knob here that allows you to switch from vocoder to equalizer. So just flip it over and put it on 4-band, which is going to slightly reduce the resolution of the noise, give it a more digital feel. And then I pushed the high end up just a tad and took the low end out, give it a bit more of a digital feel as well. And doesn't sound exactly like the original, but it's not far. Your mind wouldn't have a hard time doing it. And then for the lead, same thing. Big strings thin, sample start pushed back, running it through a digital vocoder, putting a little low end in it, taking a little high end out. So that's nice. And something I'm doing with both of these is panning them left and right in the stereo channels, and then putting an opposite delay on them. So I've got my I've got my lead here running on the right channel, and then echoing immediately to the left channel. Now, if you're listening in HD, you'll be able to hear this. You can hear how it starts in the right channel, and then bounces immediately to the left, which is something you heard a lot in old Super Nintendo songs. And the same thing with the pulse. Starts on the left, bounces immediately to the right. And we put them together, you get a nice little stereo spread. So that's simple enough. Now let's talk about layering. This is one of my favorite tricks. I like to take my chiptunes to the next level. Put a little bam in them, if you want to be cliche like that, which apparently I do. So there's a couple of tricks we're going to use here. And one of my favorite things to do is layer things up. Just repeat the same melody with a stronger synth line. So we took our original pulse and then duplicated it with the higher end and split that between the stereo channels. Now in Maelstrom, you have this great little knob called spread. And what that does is separate the two oscillators between the stereo channels. So it pushes oscillator A to the left channel and oscillator B to the right channel. So if you're listening in HD again, you can hear, if I pull this over, everything's right in the middle. Everything's split between the two channels. That'll add a richness to your sound. Now we've done the same thing with the lead synth. So here's the original. And then I'm using a basic Thor analog oscillator to dupe that up. And that one's got some amp pan that's using LFO1 to affect it. So what that means is it's running through the LFO, and after the delay period, it's oscillating between the two channels. So that's what gives it that warbliness to the left and right that you're hearing there. Then I've also added in a bass line that was not in the original. Pretty simple. And then I threw some drums on it that aren't really 8-bit at all. You know, I'm going for something a little bit richer than Chiptunes feel, just trying to harken to video game sound in spirit. Let's see what it sounds like all together. So that's incredibly rich. Now it's up to your discretion here whether you want to stick a little closer to the authentic sound or if you want to push things to the next level and make them a little richer. I think that's about the end of the tutorial. If you got any questions, you're welcome to shoot me an email. That's info@tettix.net, Tettix.net. All this stuff's also going to be available on my website in the archive. And again, it's just Tettix.net. And if you took anything away from this and you want some feedback, if you've made some stuff and you want to let me hear it, I'd love to take a listen. Just shoot me an email. I try to respond to every email I get. Thanks, guys.